I stood in the break room, my coffee cup trembling in my hands as I stared at the termination letter Derek had just handed me. After 3 years of exemplary performance reviews and building this department from complete chaos into a model of efficiency, I was being fired for not being a cultural fit. Through the glass partition, I could see Derek's 22-year-old cousin Tyler high-fiving my coworkers at what used to be my desk. "My family comes first," Derek had said with that smug smile plastered across his face. Corporate's surprise audit was starting tomorrow, and they would be looking for me specifically. My name is May, and I never thought I would be sitting in my Honda Civic at 9:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, unemployed and completely blindsided. 3 years ago, I had packed up my entire life in Phoenix and moved to Seattle with my 8-year-old daughter Emma for this position at Meridian Industries. It was supposed to be our fresh start after her father disappeared, leaving us with nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. When I first walked into the operations department at Meridian Industries, I honestly thought someone was playing a cruel joke on me. Files were scattered everywhere. Shipment schedules existed only on crumpled post-it notes, and nobody could tell me where anything was supposed to be. The warehouse supervisor, Marcus, had been doing his best to keep things running, but without proper coordination. From operations, drivers were showing up to empty loading docks, and clients were receiving the wrong orders 3 weeks late. I spent my first month creating systems that should have existed from day one. Color-coded filing systems, digital tracking spreadsheets, automated reminder schedules, and clear communication protocols between operations and the warehouse. Marcus was grateful beyond words when shipments started arriving on time, and inventory actually matched what our computer system claimed we had in stock. Derek Patterson, my boss, and the regional operations manager seemed pleased with my work initially. He loved bragging to corporate about how his department had turned around so dramatically, but as time went on, I noticed his attitude shifting. He started making comments about how I was too rigid, too focused on following procedures that he claimed were outdated and unnecessary. The tension really began 6 months ago when Derek started bringing his cousin Tyler around the office. Tyler had just graduated from some community college with a business degree and no real-world experience. Derek would walk him through the warehouse, pointing out all the improvements I had implemented while talking about how family loyalty was the most important value in business. I should have seen the warning signs when Derek started questioning every decision I made. Why did I need to document vendor communications so thoroughly? Why couldn't we just trust our long-term suppliers without requiring signed delivery confirmations? Why was I so insistent on following corporate protocols when we could handle things more efficiently with a personal touch? Janet from Human Resources started acting strangely around me too. She would avoid eye contact during meetings and seemed uncomfortable whenever Derek praised my work in front of other managers. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, but now I realize she must have known what was coming. This morning started like any other. I arrived at the office at 7:15, an hour before my official start time, to prepare the quarterly efficiency reports for corporate. Our parent company always conducted surprise audits, and I wanted everything to be perfect. I had spent weeks compiling data, cross-referencing warehouse inventories with delivery schedules, and creating detailed presentations showing how our operational improvements had saved the company over $50,000 in the past quarter alone. Derek was already in his office when I arrived, which was unusual since he rarely showed up before 9. Through his glass door, I could see him having an intense conversation with Tyler, who was nodding and taking notes like he was receiving important instructions. Something about their body language made me uneasy, but I focused on my reports and tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. At 8:45, Derek called me into his office. Tyler was sitting in the chair across from Derek's desk, grinning like he had just won the lottery. Derek didn't waste time with small talk. He told me that my position was being eliminated due to year restructuring and that my last day was today. When I asked for clarification about the restructuring, he explained that they were streamlining operations by having someone with fresh ideas take over my responsibilities. I looked at Tyler, who couldn't have been older than 22, and realized what was happening. This wasn't restructuring. This was nepotism in its most blatant form. I asked Derek directly if Tyler was replacing me, and he confirmed it without any shame whatsoever. Family comes first, he said, and Tyler brings a modern perspective that will benefit the department. I tried to maintain my professionalism as Derek listed all the reasons why I wasn't a good fit for the company culture. I was too serious, too old school, too focused on following rules instead of building relationships. I asked about my performance reviews, which had been excellent, and Derek dismissed them as not reflecting the full picture of what the company needed going forward. As I was processing this information, Derek's computer screen caught my attention. He had minimized several windows, but I could see the edge of a spreadsheet that looked like one of my efficiency reports. The numbers visible on the screen were different from the ones in my original files. Higher productivity percentages, lower cost figures, adjusted delivery times that didn't match the actual data I had compiled. While Derek continued his speech about how this decision was best for everyone, I discreetly took a photo of his computer screen with my phone. Something was very wrong here, and I had a feeling that falsifying company reports was just the beginning of whatever Derek was trying to hide. When Derek finished explaining the termination, he handed me a box and told me I had 30 minutes to pack my personal belongings. Tyler would be moving into my office immediately to ensure a smooth transition. Janet appeared at the door with termination paperwork, avoiding my eyes as she explained my final paycheck and the non-disclosure agreement I was required to sign. I packed my personal items in stunned silence while Tyler measured my office for new furniture. My co-workers watched through the glass partition, clearly uncomfortable but afraid to say anything. Marcus caught my eye from the warehouse entrance and shook his head sadly. He knew as well as I did that Tyler had no idea how to manage the complex systems that kept our operations running smoothly. During my exit interview with Janet, she kept emphasizing how important it was for me to move forward positively and not dwell on negative feelings about the company. She stressed the confidentiality agreement several times, which struck me as odd since I had never caused any problems or complained about anything during my employment. As I drove home, my mind was racing with questions and anger. How could Derek fire me for doing exactly what I was hired to do? How could he hand my job to someone with no experience or qualifications? And why did those numbers on his computer screen look wrong? The more I thought about it, the more pieces started falling into place. Derek's expensive lifestyle had always seemed inconsistent with his salary level. The new BMW designer clothes and luxury vacation photos on his social media suggested income well beyond what a regional operations manager would typically earn. I had always assumed he came from money or had investments, but now I was wondering if there was a more troubling explanation. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made a decision. I was going to figure out exactly what Derek was hiding, and I was going to make sure the right people knew about it. Tyler might have my job, but he didn't have my integrity or my documentation. And if Derek thought he could silence me with a termination and a confidentiality agreement, he was about to learn just how wrong he could be. That night, I couldn't sleep. Emma had asked why I was home early, and I told her I was taking some time off to spend with her. The lie felt bitter in my mouth, but I couldn't explain unemployment and financial panic to an 8-year-old who was already dealing with the absence of her father. After Emma went to bed, I spread out all the copies of reports I had kept on my home computer. I had always maintained personal backup files of my work, partly from paranoia and partly from professional pride. Looking at them now with fresh eyes, I started noticing discrepancies that I had never caught before. The numbers Derek had shown to corporate in previous quarterly reviews didn't match the raw data I had collected from the warehouse. Productivity figures had been inflated, cost savings had been exaggerated, and delivery times had been adjusted to make our performance look significantly better than reality. Someone had been systematically altering my reports before they reached the parent company. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. He couldn't sleep either, and he wanted to know if I had noticed anything strange about the latest inventory reports. The numbers he was seeing in the warehouse system didn't match what Derek had been submitting to corporate. We arranged to meet for coffee the next morning. Marcus looked exhausted when I met him at the diner near our old office. He had been with Meridian Industries for 12 years, and he had never seen anything like what was happening under Derek's management. He showed me printouts of warehouse inventory logs that revealed a disturbing pattern. According to Marcus's records, we were consistently short on high-value electronics and specialty equipment, but Derek's reports to corporate showed perfect inventory accuracy with no unexplained losses. Either Marcus was incompetent at his job, which his 12-year track record disproved, or someone was covering up systematic theft. Marcus explained that Derek had been pressuring him for months to stop reporting inventory discrepancies. Derek claimed that small losses were normal in the logistics industry and that documenting every missing item created unnecessary paperwork that made the department look inefficient. When Marcus insisted on following proper protocols, Derek threatened to write him up for being uncooperative. I realized that my meticulous documentation and insistence on following corporate procedures hadn't just been inconvenient for Derek. I had been creating a paper trail that could expose whatever scheme he was running. My termination wasn't about nepotism or cultural fit. It was about eliminating a witness. That afternoon, I called my former colleague Linda, who had transferred to the Denver office 18 months ago. Linda had worked under Derek before his promotion to the Seattle region, and I wondered if she had noticed anything suspicious during her time there. Linda's reaction to my questions confirmed my worst fears. She had experienced the exact same pattern in Denver. Derek had gradually taken over more control of operations, reporting questioned employees who followed proper documentation procedures and created an atmosphere where asking too many questions was seen as disloyalty to the team. Linda told me about irregularities she had noticed in Denver, including missing inventory that was never properly reported, and vendor payments that seemed inconsistent with actual deliveries. When she tried to bring these concerns to Derek's attention, he dismissed them as minor administrative issues that didn't require investigation. The most disturbing revelation was that Derek's sudden promotion to Seattle had come right after an internal audit in Denver raised questions about operational efficiency. Linda said the timing seemed suspicious, but she assumed corporate had been impressed with Derek's ability to improve numbers and decided to give him a bigger challenge. Now I understood the real reason for Derek's promotion. He hadn't been rewarded for success. He had been moved before anyone could dig deeper into his methods, and his pattern of theft and falsification had simply continued in a new location with new victims. While I was processing this information, my phone rang. It was Sarah from accounting, and she sounded nervous. She asked if we could meet privately because she had noticed some irregularities that she thought I should know about. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop several miles from the office. Sarah had always been meticulous about her work, and she had been tracking vendor payments and operational costs for the past year. She showed me spreadsheets that revealed a pattern of overpayments to certain suppliers, followed by mysterious refunds that didn't show up in our operational budgets. According to Sarah's analysis, Derek had been approving inflated invoices from specific vendors, then arranging for the excess amounts to be refunded to accounts that weren't connected to Meridian Industries. The total amount over the past year exceeded $75,000, and Sarah suspected the pattern had been going on much longer. Sarah had tried to discuss these discrepancies with Derek, but he had told her that vendor relationships were complex and that questioning payment arrangements could damage important business partnerships. When she persisted, Derek had suggested that her job security might depend on focusing on her assigned responsibilities rather than investigating areas outside her expertise. The picture that emerged from my conversations with Marcus, Linda, and Sarah was clear and terrifying. Derek had been running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that involved falsifying operational reports, stealing inventory, and manipulating vendor payments. He had been using his authority to silence employees who might expose his crimes, and he had been moving from office to office to stay ahead of discovery. My termination wasn't just unfair. It was part of a criminal conspiracy to cover up theft from our employer. And Tyler's hiring wasn't just nepotism. It was Derek's attempt to replace my professional competence and integrity with someone who would follow orders without asking questions. As I drove home that evening, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. I had evidence of crimes that could cost Derek his freedom and save Meridian Industries from continued losses. But I also knew that exposing him would require courage and preparation. Derek had already shown that he was willing to destroy careers to protect his secrets. I thought about Emma sleeping peacefully at home, trusting that her mother would figure out how to keep their small family safe and secure. I thought about Marcus Sarah and all the honest employees who were unknowingly working for a criminal. And I thought about all the future victims in other offices if Derek was allowed to continue his pattern unchecked. That night, I started documenting everything I knew. I scanned every report, organized every conversation, and created a timeline that showed Derek's criminal behavior across multiple locations. I didn't know when or how I would use this information, but I knew that someday someone would need to see the truth. I also started preparing for the possibility that Derek might try to retaliate against me for asking questions. I made copies of all my documentation and stored them in multiple locations. I researched whistleblower protections and corporate fraud reporting procedures. And I practiced telling my story in a way that would be clear and compelling to investigators. Whatever happened next, I was going to be ready. Derek might have thought that firing me would end his problems, but he was about to discover that eliminating a witness only works if you actually succeed in silencing them. And I had no intention of staying silent while he continued to steal from our employer and threaten our coworkers. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek had fired me for being too serious about following rules and procedures. But those same rules and procedures were going to be exactly what brought him down. The next morning, I was making breakfast for Emma when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from our corporate headquarters in Portland. I answered hesitantly, wondering if Derek was already trying to cause problems for me. The voice on the other end was professional and unfamiliar. The woman introduced herself as Patricia Williams, Regional Director for Operations, and explained that she was trying to reach me regarding some follow-up questions about our department's recent performance metrics. She asked if I would be available for a brief conversation later that morning. I told Patricia that I was no longer employed by Meridian Industries as of yesterday, which seemed to surprise her. She asked for clarification about my departure, and I explained that my position had been eliminated as part of a departmental restructuring. Patricia paused for a long moment before asking if I would be willing to speak with her anyway, as my insights might still be valuable for their review process. Something in Patricia's tone suggested that this wasn't a routine follow-up call. I agreed to meet with her, and she said she would contact me later with specific details. After I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that events were beginning to move in directions that Derek hadn't anticipated. 2 hours later, Patricia called back with a request that made my pulse quicken. She was currently at our office with a team of investigators, and they specifically needed to speak with me about operational procedures and documentation systems. She asked if I could come to the office immediately, emphasizing that my cooperation would be greatly appreciated by the corporate compliance department. I arranged for Emma to stay with our neighbor after school and drove to the office with my heart pounding. In the parking lot, I noticed several unfamiliar cars with government license plates. Whatever was happening inside it was clearly more serious than a routine corporate review. When I walked into the building, the atmosphere was tense and electric. Employees were speaking in hushed whispers, and I could see Derek through his office window talking animatedly with several people in business suits. Tyler was standing near my former desk looking confused and overwhelmed. Patricia Williams was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who commanded immediate respect. She introduced me to her team, which included investigators from corporate security and what appeared to be federal agents. They escorted me to a conference room where Patricia explained the situation with clinical precision. An anonymous tip had prompted a federal investigation into potential financial irregularities at multiple Meridian Industries locations. The investigation had revealed patterns of falsified reports, inventory discrepancies, and suspicious vendor relationships that warranted immediate intervention. They had requested my presence specifically because my documentation and organizational systems were considered crucial to understanding the scope of the problems. Patricia's next words made my stomach drop. They had asked Derek to produce the operational reports and documentation systems that I had created, and he had confidently informed them that I was no longer available because he had terminated my employment yesterday for performance issues. The timing of my termination, combined with Derek's obvious nervousness, had raised serious red flags for the investigation team. When Patricia asked Derek to explain why he had fired the person they specifically needed to interview, his response had been a disaster. He had proudly described how he had eliminated a difficult employee who was too rigid about following unnecessary procedures. He had explained that my replacement, his cousin Tyler, would bring a fresh perspective that was more aligned with modern business practices. The federal investigators had exchanged meaningful looks during Derek's explanation. In their experience, firing key personnel right before an audit was a common tactic used by criminals trying to eliminate witnesses or destroy evidence. Derek's obvious satisfaction with removing me from the equation had convinced them that they were dealing with someone who had something significant to hide. Patricia asked me to walk them through the documentation systems I had created and explain any irregularities I might have noticed in operational data. I showed them my personal backup files and explained the discrepancies between my original reports and the versions that Derek had submitted to corporate. The investigators were particularly interested in my photographs of Derek's computer screen, which clearly showed falsified numbers being entered into official reports. They asked detailed questions about Derek's access to inventory systems, his relationships with vendors, and his interactions with employees who had questioned unusual procedures. As I answered their questions, I could see Derek becoming increasingly agitated through the conference room window. Tyler was standing beside him, clearly in over his head, as investigators asked him basic questions about operational procedures that he couldn't answer. Agent Robert Chen from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit explained that they had been tracking a pattern of embezzlement across multiple logistics companies in the Pacific Northwest. The methods matched exactly what I had documented in Derek's operations, including falsified efficiency reports, manipulated inventory records, and suspicious vendor payment arrangements. Patricia told me that my meticulous documentation had provided them with the clearest picture they had seen of how this type of fraud was carried out. My insistence on following proper procedures and maintaining detailed records had created exactly the kind of evidence trail that federal prosecutors needed to build a strong case. The most shocking revelation came when Agent Chen showed me financial records they had obtained through court orders. Derek had been depositing significant amounts of cash into personal accounts that couldn't be explained by his legitimate salary. The pattern of deposits matched the timeline of inventory discrepancies and vendor payment irregularities that I had documented. As we talked, Marcus and Sarah were separately interviewed by other members of the investigation team. Both of them confirmed the pressure Derek had applied to discourage them from following proper reporting procedures. Sarah's documentation of vendor payment irregularities was particularly valuable because it showed the financial mechanisms Derek had used to steal from the company. Patricia explained that Derek's scheme had been more sophisticated than typical embezzlement cases. Rather than simply stealing money directly, he had been manipulating multiple systems to create legitimate-looking transactions that funneled company resources into his personal accounts. The false efficiency reports had been designed to make his theft look like improved operational performance. The investigation team estimated that Derek had stolen over $200,000 from Meridian Industries across multiple office locations. His promotion from Denver to Seattle hadn't been a reward for good performance. It had been an escape from an office where his crimes were becoming too obvious to hide. When we finished the interview, Patricia made an offer that left me speechless. She wanted to immediately reinstate my employment with full back pay and a promotion to a senior operational role. The company needed someone with my integrity and attention to detail to help rebuild trust and implement stronger oversight procedures. As I walked out of his conference room, Derek was waiting in the hallway. His face was pale and his hands were shaking as he tried to appear casual and confident. He told me that there must have been some misunderstanding about my performance and that he would be happy to discuss bringing me back if corporate thought it was necessary. The desperation in Derek's voice was obvious to everyone within earshot. The man who had smugly fired me yesterday for being too serious about following rules was now begging me to cooperate with covering up his crimes. His confident assertion that family comes first had transformed into a panicked realization that his family might soon be visiting him in federal prison. I looked Derek directly in the eyes and told him that I would be happy to continue our conversation with the federal investigators present. His face went completely white as he realized that I knew exactly what he had been doing and that I had no intention of protecting him from the consequences of his actions. Patricia walked Derek back to his office, where Tyler was unsuccessfully trying to explain to investigators why he couldn't access basic operational files. The young man Derek had hired to replace my competence was now highlighting exactly how much expertise was required to do the job properly. As I drove home to tell Emma that Mommy might be going back to work very soon, I realized that Derek's attempt to silence me had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. His criminal arrogance had led him to eliminate the one person who could have helped him maintain his cover story. Now, instead of being his victim, I was going to be the key witness in his prosecution. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Emma noticed the change in my mood immediately and asked if something good had happened. I told her that sometimes when bad things happen to good people, it just means that even better things are on their way. Patricia had called the evening before to arrange my return to work. My official title would be Operations Director, which came with a significant salary increase and authority over the entire operational structure that Derek had been mismanaging. More importantly, I would be working directly with the federal investigation team to help rebuild systems that could prevent future fraud. As I drove to work, I thought about how dramatically my situation had changed in just 48 hours. 2 days ago, I had been a terminated employee with no prospects and a mountain of financial stress. Now I was returning as a senior executive with the power to implement the changes I had always wanted to make. The office atmosphere was electric when I arrived. Word had spread that federal agents were conducting interviews and reviewing financial records. Derek was nowhere to be seen, which Patricia later explained was because he had been placed on administrative suspension pending the completion of the criminal investigation. Tyler approached me nervously as I was setting up my new office. The young man who had been so confident about replacing me looked exhausted and overwhelmed. He apologized profusely for taking my job and explained that Derek had told him I was leaving voluntarily to pursue other opportunities. Tyler's confession revealed the extent of Derek's manipulation. Derek had coached him on what to say to investigators, provided him with scripted answers about operational procedures, and assured him that he didn't need to understand the technical details because the systems were outdated and would be replaced soon. The most damaging revelation was Tyler's admission that Derek had given him specific instructions to delete certain files and avoid discussing inventory discrepancies with anyone outside the department. Tyler hadn't understood why these instructions were necessary, but he had followed them because Derek was family and he trusted his guidance. I realized that Tyler wasn't a criminal collaborator. He was another victim of Derek's manipulation, a young man who had been used to replace someone Derek perceived as a threat. I decided to offer Tyler the opportunity to learn the job properly rather than simply firing him for his uncle's crimes. Marcus was relieved beyond words when I returned. He had been trying to maintain warehouse operations while investigators reviewed every aspect of our inventory management. The stress of the situation had been overwhelming, especially since he had been afraid that Derek's crimes might somehow implicate him as well. Sarah's reaction was more emotional. She thanked me repeatedly for validating her concerns about the vendor payment irregularities. Derek had made her feel stupid and paranoid for questioning obvious problems, and she had begun to doubt her own professional competence. Patricia introduced me to Agent Chen and the rest of the investigation team, who were impressed with the documentation I had provided. My records had allowed them to trace Derek's criminal activities across multiple offices and establish a clear timeline of escalating theft and falsification. The scope of Derek's crimes was even more extensive than I had realized. He had been running similar schemes in 3 different offices over 5 years, adapting his methods based on what he learned from previous locations. His pattern was to gradually gain control of operational reporting, eliminate employees who asked too many questions, and then systematically steal from inventory and vendor accounts. Agent Chen explained that Derek's confidence in firing me had been a critical mistake from a criminal perspective. By eliminating the person who had created detailed documentation of his activities, Derek had essentially handed investigators a roadmap to his crimes. My backup files and photographs provided evidence that would be nearly impossible to challenge in court. The investigation team asked me to help them understand exactly how Derek's falsification systems worked. I walked them through the process of comparing my original reports with the versions Derek had submitted to corporate, showing them specific instances where he had altered numbers to hide theft and inflate performance metrics. Most shocking was the discovery that Derek had been using Tyler's access credentials to make some of the system changes. This meant that if the crimes had been discovered while I was still employed, Tyler could have been blamed for the falsification, while Derek maintained plausible deniability. Patricia revealed that Derek's schemes had cost Meridian Industries an estimated $400,000 across all locations, with additional losses from damaged client relationships and regulatory compliance issues. The company was facing potential federal penalties for failing to detect the fraud, which made my documentation even more valuable for demonstrating their commitment to cooperation and reform. The most satisfying moment came when Derek called my office directly, clearly unaware that federal agents were monitoring his communications. He tried to convince me that we could work together to resolve the situation quietly, suggesting that I might benefit financially from helping him smooth things over with corporate. I put the call on speaker so that Agent Chen could hear Derek's attempt to obstruct the investigation. Derek's offer to share some of his stolen profits in exchange for my cooperation provided prosecutors with clear evidence of his consciousness of guilt and his willingness to corrupt witnesses. When I politely declined Derek's offer and suggested that he discuss any concerns with the federal investigators, his tone shifted to desperation and threats. He reminded me about the confidentiality agreement I had signed and suggested that violating it could result in legal problems for me. Agent Chen took the phone and identified himself to Derek, explaining that witness intimidation was a separate federal crime that would be added to the growing list of charges. Derek's shocked silence was followed by the sound of him hanging up abruptly, apparently realizing that his situation had just become significantly worse. That afternoon, Patricia announced my promotion to the entire staff and explained that I would be leading efforts to implement stronger oversight and compliance procedures. The response from my colleagues was overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing relief that someone with proven integrity would be overseeing operations. Marcus was promoted to Assistant Operations Director, recognizing his years of faithful service and his courage in supporting the investigation despite Derek's threats. Sarah was offered a transfer to the Corporate Compliance Department where her attention to detail and ethical standards would be valuable for preventing future fraud. As I worked late that evening implementing new security protocols and reviewing vendor contracts for potential irregularities, I reflected on how Derek's arrogance had led to his downfall. His belief that firing me would eliminate his problems had instead created the perfect witness against him. Tyler stopped by my office before leaving, asking if he could start over with proper training and supervision. I agreed, seeing in him the potential for redemption that comes from learning hard lessons about integrity and accountability. Unlike his uncle, Tyler seemed genuinely remorseful and eager to earn his position through merit rather than family connections. The irony was perfect. Derek had fired me for being too serious about following rules and procedures. But those same rules and procedures were going to send him to federal prison while elevating me to a position where I could ensure that his crimes would never be repeated. Justice was beginning to take shape, and I was no longer its victim. I was its instrument. 3 weeks after my reinstatement, the full scope of Derek's criminal enterprise became clear. FBI raids on his home and personal storage units uncovered luxury items, cash deposits, and detailed records that confirm the systematic nature of his theft across multiple offices. The raid on Derek's house was particularly revealing. Investigators found over $30,000 in cash hidden in his home office, along with receipts for expensive purchases that couldn't be justified by his legitimate salary. His computer contained spreadsheets tracking stolen inventory and falsified reports dating back 4 years. Most damaging was Derek's personal journal, which investigators discovered in a safe behind a painting in his bedroom. The journal contained detailed entries describing his methods for manipulating reports, intimidating employees, and covering up inventory theft. In his own handwriting, Derek had documented exactly how he planned to eliminate potential witnesses and expand his operations to new locations. The journal entries revealed Derek's contempt for the employees he supervised and his belief that he was smarter than corporate security systems. He had written extensively about his plans to fire me, describing me as the biggest threat to his operations because of my attention to detail and insistence on following procedures. Linda flew in from Denver to provide testimony about Derek's previous schemes. Her evidence helped establish the pattern of criminal behavior that prosecutors needed to demonstrate Derek's intent and sophistication. The Denver office investigation revealed an additional $150,000 in theft that had been attributed to operational inefficiencies. Tyler's cooperation with investigators provided crucial insights into Derek's recruitment and manipulation tactics. Derek had specifically targeted family members for key positions because he believed their loyalty would prevent them from reporting suspicious activities. Tyler's testimony showed how Derek had groomed him to be an unwitting accomplice in covering up crimes. The most shocking revelation came when investigators discovered that Derek's father-in-law, Robert Morrison, had been providing inside information from the Corporate Compliance Department. Morrison had been warning Derek about upcoming audits and helping him time his criminal activities to avoid detection. Morrison's involvement elevated Derek's case from simple embezzlement to organized corporate fraud conspiracy. The discovery that Derek had corrupted someone in corporate oversight explained how he had been able to operate across multiple offices without detection for so long. Patricia worked with me to implement comprehensive reforms designed to prevent future fraud. We created multiple layers of oversight for operational reporting, established independent verification procedures for inventory management, and implemented automated systems that would flag unusual vendor payment patterns. The new systems I designed included real-time monitoring of inventory movements, mandatory dual approval for all vendor payments over $1,000, and automated alerts when operational reports showed significant variations from historical patterns. These changes would make it virtually impossible for someone to replicate Derek's schemes. Marcus thrived in his new role as Assistant Operations Director, demonstrating natural leadership abilities that had been suppressed under Derek's dysfunctional management style. His deep knowledge of warehouse operations, combined with his commitment to ethical practices, made him an ideal partner in rebuilding departmental integrity. Sarah's transfer to corporate compliance was mutually beneficial. Her experience with Derek's vendor payment schemes gave her unique insights into how financial fraud could be disguised as legitimate business transactions. She became a specialist in detecting the early warning signs of embezzlement. Tyler's transformation was remarkable to witness. Under proper supervision and training, he demonstrated genuine aptitude for operational management. His experience as Derek's unwitting accomplice gave him valuable perspective on how criminal supervisors recruit and manipulate honest employees. The client retention meetings I conducted were emotionally challenging but ultimately successful. Several major clients had been considering ending their relationships with Meridian Industries due to repeated delivery problems and billing discrepancies under Derek's management. My presentations showing the new oversight procedures and operational improvements convinced most of them to give us another opportunity. Derek's legal troubles multiplied as investigators uncovered additional evidence. Beyond the embezzlement charges he faced, counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. Morrison faced similar charges for his role in providing inside information and helping Derek avoid detection. The prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Jessica Barnes, praised the quality of evidence that I had helped provide. My documentation had created a clear narrative that jurors would be able to understand, showing exactly how Derek had stolen from his employer and threatened employees who might expose his crimes. Emma's school project about heroes gave me an opportunity to reflect on how our situation had changed. She chose me as her subject, writing about how her mother had stood up to a bad person at work and helped catch him. Her teacher's comments noted Emma's pride in having a mother who chose to do the right thing even when it was difficult. The ripple effects of Derek's prosecution extended beyond Meridian Industries. Other logistics companies in the region began reviewing their own operational oversight procedures, concerned that similar schemes might be operating in their organizations. Our case became a model for how proper documentation and employee protection could prevent corporate fraud. Patricia announced her intention to recommend me for promotion to Regional Operations Manager, a position that would give me oversight responsibility for multiple offices across the Pacific Northwest. The promotion would represent complete vindication of my professional competence and a clear repudiation of Derek's claims about my performance. 6 months after my termination and reinstatement, Derek's trial began with jury selection. His defense attorney attempted to portray him as an ambitious manager whose methods were questionable but not criminal. The prosecution's opening statement focused on the systematic nature of his theft and his willingness to destroy careers to protect his crimes. My testimony lasted 2 full days and covered every aspect of Derek's criminal operations that I had documented. The prosecution walked me through my reports, my photographs of falsified data, and my communications with other employees who had been threatened for asking questions about irregularities. Derek's reaction during my testimony was visible to the entire courtroom. His confident demeanor from our last confrontation had been replaced by obvious anxiety and occasional outbursts of frustration. His attorney repeatedly objected to evidence that clearly demonstrated Derek's guilt, but the judge allowed most of my testimony to stand. The moment when the prosecution displayed Derek's journal entries was particularly satisfying. His own words describing his plans to fire me and his contempt for honest employees demonstrated his criminal intent more clearly than any other evidence. The jury's expressions showed their shock at Derek's callous calculation. When Derek's attorney cross-examined me, he attempted to suggest that my documentation was motivated by personal animosity rather than professional concern. I calmly explained that I had been documenting irregularities for months before Derek fired me, and that my goal had always been to protect the company from financial losses. The defense attorney's questions about my motives backfired spectacularly when he asked why I had kept backup copies of my work files. I explained that maintaining personal backups was standard professional practice for someone responsible for complex operational systems, and that these files had ultimately saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. Marcus and Sarah's testimony corroborated my account of Derek's pressure tactics and confirmed the atmosphere of intimidation he had created. Tyler's testimony was particularly damaging because it showed how Derek had recruited family members to participate in covering up his crimes. The prosecution's presentation of financial evidence was methodical and overwhelming. Forensic accountants traced every dollar Derek had stolen and showed exactly how he had disguised theft as legitimate business transactions. The paper trail I had helped create made it impossible for Derek to claim ignorance or accident. After deliberating for less than 6 hours, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts against Derek and Morrison. Derek's sentencing was scheduled for 2 months later, with prosecutors recommending a sentence of 5 to 7 years in federal prison, plus full restitution to Meridian Industries and other affected companies. As I left the courthouse after the verdict, I realized that Derek's attempt to silence me by firing me had led directly to his conviction and imprisonment. His arrogant belief that eliminating witnesses would protect his crimes had instead created the perfect conditions for his own downfall. The day of Derek's sentencing arrived 6 months later, and I was asked to provide a victim impact statement to help the judge understand how his crimes had affected honest employees and the company as a whole. I had spent weeks preparing remarks that would convey the full scope of damage Derek had caused while maintaining the professional dignity that had defined my career. Standing at the podium in federal court, I looked directly at Derek as I described how his criminal conspiracy had threatened my family's financial security and undermined the workplace integrity that I had spent years building. I explained how his attempt to fire me for following proper procedures had revealed the full extent of his willingness to destroy careers to protect his theft. Derek avoided eye contact during my statement, staring at the defense table while I detailed the evidence that had led to his conviction. His attorney had advised him to show remorse and accept responsibility, but his body language suggested continued defiance rather than genuine repentance for his crimes. Judge Rebecca Martinez listened carefully as I explained how Derek's schemes had damaged employee morale and client relationships across multiple offices. I emphasized that his crimes weren't just financial theft, but betrayals of trust that had threatened the livelihoods of dozens of honest workers who depended on Meridian Industries for their families' security. The most powerful part of my statement focused on Derek's systematic intimidation of employees who tried to follow proper procedures. I described how he had created an atmosphere where asking questions about obvious irregularities was treated as disloyalty, and how his termination of me was intended to send a message to other employees about the consequences of maintaining professional integrity. When Derek's attorney presented mitigation arguments, he attempted to portray Derek as a family man who had made poor decisions under financial pressure. The attorney emphasized Derek's lack of prior criminal history and his willingness to make restitution to victims of his embezzlement. The prosecution's response demolished any sympathy Derek might have gained from his mitigation presentation. Assistant U.S. Attorney Barnes reminded the judge that Derek's crimes were sophisticated, premeditated, and sustained over multiple years across different offices. She emphasized that Derek had recruited family members as accomplices and corrupted corporate oversight to avoid detection. Most damaging to Derek's appeal for leniency was the prosecution's presentation of his journal entries, which showed his contempt for his victims and his detailed planning to expand his criminal operations. His own words demonstrated that he viewed honest employees as obstacles to be eliminated rather than colleagues deserving respect and fair treatment. Judge Martinez sentenced Derek to 4 years in federal prison, 3 years of supervised probation, and full restitution of $625,000 to Meridian Industries and other affected companies. Morrison received 2 years in prison and similar restitution requirements for his role in providing inside information. The restitution order included compensation for the emotional distress and career disruption Derek had caused me and other employees he had terminated or intimidated. While money couldn't completely repair the damage Derek had done, the financial recognition validated our suffering and acknowledged the injustice of his actions. After the sentencing, Patricia announced my promotion to Regional Operations Manager for the Pacific Northwest region. The promotion ceremony was held at our Seattle office, with representatives from corporate headquarters and other regional offices attending to recognize my role in exposing and stopping Derek's criminal enterprise. Emma attended the promotion ceremony wearing her best dress and carrying a bouquet of flowers she had picked from our garden. Her presence reminded me that my decision to fight Derek's injustice had been motivated not just by professional principle, but by my responsibility to provide my daughter with a secure future and a positive example of standing up for what's right. Tyler's completion of his training program was another source of satisfaction. Under proper supervision, he had developed into a competent operational coordinator who understood the importance of integrity and accountability in business relationships. His transformation proved that Derek's family connections didn't have to define his professional character. Marcus and Sarah's success in their new roles demonstrated how Derek's oppressive management style had suppressed the potential of talented employees. With proper leadership and support, both of them flourished and became valuable contributors to rebuilding the department's reputation and operational efficiency. The ripple effects of Derek's prosecution extended throughout the logistics industry. Professional associations began offering training programs on fraud detection and whistleblower protection, using our case as an example of how proper documentation and employee empowerment could prevent corporate crime. 6 months after Derek began serving his sentence, I received a letter from him in federal prison. The letter was a rambling attempt to justify his actions and minimize the harm he had caused. He claimed that his embezzlement had been motivated by family financial pressures and that his treatment of employees had been standard business practice rather than criminal intimidation. Derek's letter also contained what appeared to be an attempt at an apology, though it was qualified with so many excuses and justifications that it seemed more like an attempt to manipulate public opinion before his eventual release. He asked for my forgiveness and suggested that we could both benefit from putting the past behind us. I showed the letter to Agent Chen, who explained that letters from convicted criminals often contained subtle attempts to influence witnesses or gather information for appeals. Derek's request for forgiveness, combined with his continued justification of his crimes, suggested that he still didn't understand the full extent of his wrongdoing. Rather than responding to Derek's letter, I decided to focus my energy on the positive changes that had resulted from exposing his crimes. The new oversight procedures I had implemented were being adopted by other Meridian Industries offices, and my training programs on ethical management were being requested by companies throughout the region. Emma's understanding of the situation had evolved as she grew older and could comprehend more complex explanations of workplace ethics and legal consequences. She began telling friends that her mother was a hero who caught a bad person and helped make sure other people wouldn't be hurt by similar crimes. 1 year after Derek's sentencing, Meridian Industries received recognition from the Department of Justice for cooperation in a major corporate fraud prosecution. The award specifically mentioned my documentation and the company's commitment to supporting employees who report criminal activity, establishing our case as a model for other businesses. The annual performance review meeting where Patricia discussed my accomplishments felt surreal compared to Derek's termination meeting just 18 months earlier. Instead of being criticized for following proper procedures and maintaining detailed documentation, I was being praised for the same qualities that Derek had claimed made me unsuitable for employment. Linda's visit from Denver for my promotion celebration provided an opportunity to reflect on how Derek's pattern of criminal behavior had ultimately led to his downfall. If he had been content with smaller thefts or the less aggressive intimidation tactics, he might have continued his schemes for years without detection. The toast Linda offered at my celebration dinner captured the irony perfectly. Derek had fired me for being too serious about following rules and maintaining proper documentation. But those same characteristics had created the evidence trail that prosecutors needed to convict him and the professional reputation that led to my promotion to regional management. As I looked around this dinner table at Marcus, Sarah, Tyler, Linda, and Emma, I realized that Derek's criminal arrogance had inadvertently created a network of people committed to preventing similar injustices in the future. His attempt to silence honest employees had instead created advocates for workplace integrity and whistleblower protection. The final irony was that Derek's nepotistic hiring of Tyler had backfired completely. Instead of gaining a loyal accomplice who would help cover up crimes, Derek had created a witness who provided crucial testimony about his manipulation tactics. Tyler's cooperation with investigators had been essential to establishing the criminal conspiracy charges. 2 years after my termination and reinstatement, I was invited to speak at a national conference on corporate fraud prevention. My presentation focused on how proper documentation, employee empowerment, and ethical leadership could create environments where criminal behavior was quickly detected and reported. The standing ovation I received after my presentation felt like complete vindication of every principle Derek had mocked during my termination. The audience of corporate executives, federal investigators, and compliance professionals recognized that following proper procedures and maintaining professional integrity were not obstacles to business success, but essential foundations for sustainable operations. Derek's attempt to eliminate me as a witness had transformed me into a national advocate for workplace justice and corporate accountability. His criminal conspiracy to silence honest employees had instead amplified my voice and given me a platform to help other victims of similar schemes. 5 years have passed since Derek fired me for nepotism, and I'm writing this from my office as Regional Director of Operations for the entire Pacific Northwest Division. The view from my window encompasses the same warehouse where Marcus now serves as District Operations Manager, overseeing a team of coordinators trained in the ethical standards we've established together. Emma is 13 now, and her school presentation last month on courage and integrity featured our story as an example of how standing up for what's right can lead to positive change, even when the immediate consequences seem devastating. Her teacher later told me that several students had asked if their parents could visit our office to learn more about workplace ethics and speaking up against wrongdoing. Tyler completed his business degree while working full-time and was promoted to senior operations coordinator last year. His transformation from Derek's unwitting accomplice to an advocate for transparent business practices has been remarkable to witness. He regularly speaks at new employee orientation sessions about the importance of questioning authority when asked to violate policies or ignore problems. The training program Tyler and I developed together has been implemented across all Meridian Industries locations. Our workshops on recognizing manipulation tactics and reporting suspicious activities have helped identify 3 other cases of potential fraud before they could cause significant damage. The early detection systems we pioneered have saved the company an estimated $2 million in potential losses. Sarah's career in corporate compliance has flourished beyond anything she could have imagined when Derek was threatening her job for asking questions about vendor payments. She now leads a team of forensic accountants who specialize in detecting sophisticated embezzlement schemes, and her expertise is regularly requested by other companies facing similar challenges. Marcus's journey from intimidated warehouse supervisor to district operations manager illustrates how toxic leadership suppresses talent while ethical management allows people to reach their full potential. His 12 years of experience, combined with the confidence that comes from working in an environment that values integrity, has made him one of the most respected managers in our division. Linda has been promoted to regional director for the Mountain West Division, and we collaborate regularly on implementing fraud prevention procedures across multiple states. Our shared experience with Derek's criminal operations has created a partnership focused on ensuring that other employees never face the intimidation and retaliation we experienced. The mentorship program I established for employees facing workplace retaliation has assisted over 200 people across various industries. Many of them were afraid to report suspected crimes or unethical behavior because they feared losing their jobs or facing professional retaliation. Our program provides legal resources, documentation guidance, and emotional support for whistleblowers. Emma often asks me to explain why Derek chose to steal money and hurt innocent people instead of simply doing his job honestly. These conversations have helped both of us understand that some people become so focused on short-term personal gain that they lose sight of the long-term consequences of their actions for themselves and others. Derek was released from federal prison after serving 3.5 years of his 4-year sentence. His supervised probation includes restrictions on accessing financial systems and working in positions that involve oversight of company assets. The restitution payments he must make will continue for the next 15 years, ensuring that his victims receive compensation for the damage he caused. I received one more letter from Derek after his release, this time offering what seemed like a genuine apology for the pain he had caused me and my family. He acknowledged that his actions had been motivated by greed rather than financial necessity, and that his treatment of employees who questioned his methods had been inexcusable. Derek's letter also revealed that his time in prison had included conversations with other white-collar criminals who helped him understand how his arrogance and entitlement had blinded him to the human cost of his crimes. He expressed hope that his prosecution might serve as a deterrent to other potential offenders and a source of vindication for his victims. While I appreciated Derek's apparent growth and reflection, I didn't respond to his letter. Some wounds heal better with distance and time rather than direct confrontation with their causes. Derek's acknowledgement of wrongdoing was important for his own rehabilitation, but my healing had already been accomplished through the positive changes that resulted from exposing his crimes. The annual company conference where I delivered the keynote address on ethical leadership felt like the culmination of a journey that began with Derek's arrogant assumption that firing me would solve his problems. Standing before an audience of executives, managers, and employees from across the country, I reflected on how his attempt to silence me had instead given me a platform to advocate for workplace justice. Patricia's retirement announcement last month included her recommendation that I succeed her as Vice President of Operations for the entire Western region. The promotion would represent the ultimate vindication of the professional competence that Derek had dismissed when he fired me for being too serious about following proper procedures. Emma's understanding of our experience has matured along with her growing awareness of workplace dynamics and social justice issues. She recently told me that she wants to become a lawyer who helps people fight unfair treatment at work, inspired by watching how documentation and persistence can overcome powerful people who abuse their authority. The community college course I teach on business ethics draws students from various backgrounds who want to understand how to maintain integrity in challenging workplace situations. Many of them have shared stories of supervisors who pressure employees to ignore problems or violate policies, and our discussions help them develop strategies for responding appropriately to these pressures. Tyler's wedding invitation last month included a note thanking me for giving him the opportunity to learn from his mistakes and grow into a leader who values honesty over family loyalty. His wedding toast mentioned how Derek's criminal behavior had initially seemed like family support, but that true family support meant helping people become their best selves rather than enabling their worst impulses. The irony that continues to amaze me is how Derek's family-first philosophy ultimately destroyed his family relationships while building mine. His willingness to involve Tyler in criminal activity damaged their relationship permanently, while my decision to fight for justice strengthened the bond between Emma and me. When people ask me what I learned from being fired for doing my job too well, I tell them that integrity is like compound interest. It may not provide immediate rewards, but its value grows over time and eventually produces returns that exceed any short-term gains available through dishonest methods. Derek's criminal conspiracy taught me that evil often contains the seeds of its own destruction. His arrogance led him to eliminate the one person who might have helped him maintain his cover story. His greed drove him to expand his operations beyond what he could safely manage. His contempt for honest employees created the witnesses who ultimately testified against him. The most important lesson I've learned is that doing the right thing, even when it seems to cost you everything, creates opportunities that wouldn't exist through any other path. Derek's termination of me felt like the end of my career, but it was actually the beginning of a journey toward professional fulfillment and personal growth that I could never have imagined. Emma's favorite bedtime story is about a brave woman who fought a dragon that was stealing from her village. The woman got hurt during the battle, but her courage inspired other villagers to join the fight, and together they defeated the dragon and made their community safer for everyone. She always asks me to promise that if we ever encounter another dragon, I'll be brave enough to fight it again. I always promise Emma that I will because I've learned that standing up to workplace bullies and criminals isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about creating environments where honest people can succeed and where the next generation can enter the workforce with confidence that integrity will be rewarded rather than punished. The thank you cards I continue to receive from employees who've used our training programs to report suspicious activities remind me that Derek's attempt to silence one voice inadvertently amplified a message that has reached thousands of people. His criminal conspiracy against workplace integrity has become a catalyst for strengthening ethical standards across multiple industries. As I finish writing this story, I'm preparing for tomorrow's board presentation where I'll recommend new company-wide policies for protecting whistleblowers and preventing retaliation against employees who report suspected crimes. The policies are based on lessons learned from my experience with Derek and refined through 5 years of helping other victims of workplace intimidation. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where doing the right thing seemed like it might cost you everything? How did you find the courage to stand up for your principles when powerful people were trying to silence you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, and I hope this experience encourages you to document everything. Trust your instincts, and remember that integrity always wins in the end. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting honest people who choose to fight corruption rather than enable it. Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about workplace courage and justice, and share it with anyone who might be facing similar challenges in their own career. Remember that every honest employee who stands up to workplace criminals makes it safer for the next person who faces the same choice between silence and speaking truth to power. Your courage today creates the ethical workplace culture that your children will inherit tomorrow.